He was about to leave, his plumbing job done, but her whispered, "You've made my night," and the silent clasp of her hand unveiled a loneliness he never knew he could mend. Silas Vance's knuckles rapped softly on the weathered oak door, the sound absorbed by the humid, late afternoon air. The oppressive warmth of July in rural Vermont pressed in, thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant, cloying sweetness of honeysuckle. He shifted, the familiar weight of his heavy toolbox nudging his thigh, a constant reminder of his current, decidedly unromantic profession. 40 minutes he'd driven from his small rented room in Bramblewood, past the winding, almost forgotten stretch of Ponderosa Creek, and onto the gravel track of Old Mill Road. His uncle Arthur, a man of few words and robust plumbing skills, had dispatched him with a curt instruction and an address, hinting at a delicate situation and a client who valued privacy. Silas, only 23, felt the raw edges of his youth, the unsteadiness of a life yet uncarved. He yearned for the clean lines of charcoal on paper, the vibrant burst of ink, the silent stories waiting to be told through illustration. But for now, the metallic tang of wrenches and the faint smell of solder were the gritty reality of his days. He was learning, patiently, methodically, to mend the broken things in other people's lives, even as his own felt perpetually unfinished. The door creaked inward, slowly, revealing a woman framed in the cool, muted light of the entryway. Even in the dimness, Silas registered her instantly. Striking. Her dark hair, a rich, deep hue, was subtly threaded with silver that caught the faintest glimmer, like moonlight woven into shadow. It was pulled back, elegantly loose, revealing a graceful neck. Her eyes, a startling shade of moss green, held a quiet, almost unsettling intensity, and a depth that spoke of untold narratives. She wore a simple, dark dress that draped with understated elegance, hinting at a slender, poised figure without revealing anything overtly. There was an undeniable aura about her, a subtle, almost imperceptible melancholy that seemed to cling to her like a fine, cool mist. Yet beneath it, a profound resilience radiated, a strength etched into the delicate lines around her eyes. She appeared to be in her late 30s, perhaps early 40s, an age gap that, to Silas, felt like an insurmountable canyon, a chasm separating his unformed youth from her mature, sculpted presence. His uncle's hastily scrawled note had identified her simply as Ilara Dubois. "Mr. Vance?" Her voice was a soft, melodic murmur, carrying a faint, elusive accent that only deepened its allure. It was a sound that seemed to pull him inward, a gentle current against the humid air. "Silas, please," he corrected, offering a polite, slightly awkward smile that felt too large on his face. He gestured vaguely with his head towards the unseen depths of the house. "My uncle, Arthur, sent me. Said you had a situation?" A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched her lips, a fleeting ghost of a smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared, like a ripple on still water. A situation indeed, the main pipe in the basement. It seems it decided to erupt rather dramatically while I was out. I came home to what can only be described as a small lake. Her tone was remarkably calm, almost detached, considering the potential chaos implied by her words. It was the calm of someone who had navigated far greater storms. Silas felt a professional instinct surge, pushing aside his initial disquiet. "Right. Well, I've got my tools. Just point me in the right direction and I'll get to it." He was eager to move, to act, to escape the disarming stillness of her presence. She stepped aside, her movement fluid and unhurried, a dancer's grace. "Follow me. It's quite a mess, I'm afraid." He followed her through a surprisingly spacious hallway, sparsely furnished yet possessing an undeniable elegance. The house itself exuded an older, almost stately charm, with high ceilings that seemed to draw the eye upward and wide, plank floors that groaned softly beneath their weight, sighing with each step. Sunlight, diffused and fractured by ancient towering trees outside, dappled the walls, illuminating a lazy dance of dust motes in the air. There was a faint, almost ethereal scent, a blend of old paper and something delicately floral, elusive and haunting. The basement was, as Ilara had so understatedly put it, a genuine situation. A significant portion of the main water pipe, a corroded relic of a bygone era, had indeed given way, disgorging a steady, insistent gush of water across the concrete floor. The air was cool and heavy, thick with the metallic tang of standing water, a damp chill that permeated everything. Silas surveyed the damage, his mind immediately shifting into diagnostic mode, calculating pipe diameters, necessary fittings, and the estimated hours of labor. "It looks like a combination of pressure issues and some serious corrosion," he announced, the words more for his own benefit, a way to anchor himself in the familiar than for her. He set down his toolbox with a resonant clank. "I'll need to shut off the main, drain the line, and replace this entire section. It'll be a few hours at least." Ilara stood by the worn, wooden basement stairs, her arms crossed loosely, her gaze fixed on him. Those serene, enigmatic green eyes observed him without judgment, without expectation, just a quiet, unwavering presence. He pulled on his thick work gloves, the familiar weight of his wrench a comforting presence in his hand. Most clients bustled, offered lukewarm coffee, or hovered with anxious questions. Ilara simply watched, a still point in the swirling chaos of his task. It was an unsettling lack of interference, a complete trust that left him feeling strangely exposed. Hours blurred into the late afternoon, the rhythmic clang of metal against metal, the hiss of water draining, and his occasional grunts of effort filling the damp basement. He worked methodically, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool subterranean air. The old pipe was more brittle than he'd initially anticipated, requiring him to cut away a surprisingly large section. He then meticulously measured and fitted the new copper piping, each connection a small act of precision. It was tedious work, demanding both patience and a steady hand, qualities he'd slowly, painstakingly cultivated since joining his uncle's business 2 years prior. At one point, he paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, and noticed Ilara still there. A silent sentinel. She hadn't left. She was leaning against a sturdy support beam, her head tilted slightly, her gaze distant, as if lost in some deep, internal landscape. Yet he could feel her implicit awareness of his presence, a thread of connection stretched taut between them. The fading light from the small, grimy basement window cast long, ephemeral shadows around her, making her seem almost ethereal, a figure from a dream. "You don't have to stay down here, you know," Silas said, his voice a little rough from exertion, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "It's probably terribly boring watching a pipe get replaced." She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his across the dim expanse. A faint, almost sad smile touched her lips, a fragile acknowledgement. "It's not boring, Silas. Not at all. It's fascinating in its own way. The way you work, so completely focused. And the silence, apart from the work itself. It's a welcome change." He hadn't considered it that way. Most people sought distraction, noise, anything to fill the voids. He mumbled something unintelligible and returned to tightening a stubborn joint, feeling a subtle, undeniable shift in the atmosphere. Her simple words had peeled back a thin layer of his professional facade, revealing a flicker of curiosity, an unspoken question that hung in the quiet air. Her observation of his focus, his quiet dedication, felt like a deeper seeing than he was accustomed to. As he secured the last connection, the sun had already dipped below the distant tree line, painting the western sky in fiery hues of orange, deepening to a rich, bruised violet. He slowly turned the main water valve back on, listening intently for any telltale drips, any hiss of a leak. A soft gurgle, then the steady, reassuring rush of water filling the pipes. No drips, no sprays. Success. A quiet triumph. He stood up, stretching his aching back, and let out a long, weary breath. All done. Good as new. Probably better. That old pipe was a disaster, just waiting for the right moment to happen. Alara pushed herself off the beam, her movements unhurried, almost deliberate, as she walked slowly towards the newly mended pipe. She ran a slender finger along the cool, smooth copper, a contemplative look on her face. Her touch seemed to imbue the inert metal with a strange, fleeting significance. "Thank you, Silas. Truly, I don't know what I would have done without your help." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the gratitude in it was palpable, a deep well of sincerity that surprised him, resonating with an intensity that went beyond a simple plumbing repair. It wasn't just about the pipe. It felt like something more profound, something that intertwined with the quiet pain he'd sensed in her from the moment he'd arrived. Her appreciation felt almost like an offering. He nodded, feeling a blush creep up his neck, a heat that had nothing to do with exertion. "Just doing my job. My uncle will send you the bill." He began to gather his tools, the desire to leave suddenly strong, almost urgent. The intimacy of the long hours spent in her presence, her quiet observation, her unexpected vulnerability, had created a delicate, unspoken bond that now felt almost too fragile, too open, too dangerously alluring. He needed to step away, to re-establish the comfortable professional distance. He reached for the latch on his toolbox, a definitive gesture of departure. "You're leaving already?" Her voice was softer now, tinged with a vulnerability he hadn't heard before, a subtle plea that caught him entirely off guard. He froze, his hand still on the latch. He looked at her, truly looked, allowing his gaze to linger. The last vestiges of daylight, filtered through the small high window, cast a gentle, almost ethereal glow on her face, highlighting the delicate lines around her eyes, the faint tremor in her slender hands. In her gaze, he saw a profound loneliness, a deep, quiet yearning that reached out to him across the dim basement, a silent cry. It was an invitation, unspoken, yet utterly clear, that went far beyond the mended pipe. You'll feel it when she takes a step, but it won't be obvious. Silas's hand remained suspended over his toolbox latch, his departure arrested by Alara's soft, almost imperceptible question. He felt a prickle on his skin, a primal, unexpected response to the raw vulnerability in her tone. The silence in the basement, now devoid of the sounds of his work, stretched, vast and echoing, amplifying the nascent emotions that had begun to coalesce between them. He wanted to offer a swift, professional excuse. "It's late, I have other calls, my uncle expects me back." But the words snagged in his throat, caught on an invisible hook. Her eyes, those deep, moss-green pools, held his, and in their depths, he saw not just profound gratitude, but a desperate, almost aching loneliness. It was a loneliness that mirrored a nascent, unacknowledged ache within himself, a quiet yearning for connection he hadn't realized was so acutely present until this moment. The age gap, the professional boundary, all seemed to blur, receding into the background against the pressing reality of her gaze. I suppose I was," he stammered, feeling utterly foolish, his voice sounding too young, too uncertain. "The work is done, after all. There's nothing else to do." He felt the familiar pull of duty, of escaping what felt increasingly like uncharted emotional territory. A faint shadow, like the swift passage of a cloud over the sun, crossed her face. A fleeting expression of disappointment, so subtle it was almost imperceptible, yet it registered sharply in Silas. She looked down at her hands, clasped loosely in front of her, her fingers interlaced. "Of course, it's been a long day, Silas, and a longer week, to be honest. Longer months, even." She paused, then slowly, hesitantly, met his gaze again, a fragile hope flickering in her eyes. Would you consider staying for a cup of tea? Or coffee? I have some homemade shortbread. It's still warm from the oven." The offer, so simple, yet so imbued with an unspoken, desperate invitation, hung in the air, weighted with far more than just hot beverages and biscuits. His mind, usually so practical and grounded in the mechanics of pipes and wrenches, raced, a chaotic whirl of conflicting thoughts. "This isn't appropriate," a stern voice of reason whispered, sharp and insistent. "She's your client. She's older. This is just awkward. You should leave." But another, more insistent voice, born of instinct and an unsettling emotional pull, countered, growing louder with each beat of his heart. "Stay. Just for a bit. There's something here. Something you need to explore." He found himself nodding before he could fully process the decision, a silent surrender to the quiet magnetism that drew him. "Tea sounds. Nice, Alara. Thank you." The words felt both incredibly vulnerable and incredibly right. A genuine smile, brighter than any he'd seen on her face all day, finally bloomed. It transformed her features, chasing away the shadows of melancholy, and revealing a warmth that had been hidden beneath layers of carefully maintained composure. It was a smile that reached her eyes, causing them to crinkle at the corners. "Wonderful. Come upstairs. It's much warmer, and I think you'll appreciate the change of scenery from the damp basement." He followed her out of the cool, damp basement and up the creaking wooden stairs into the kitchen. It was a large, airy room, slightly dated but immaculately clean, with a worn, comforting wooden table at its center. The scent of vanilla and something herbaceous, perhaps dried lavender, lingered in the air, a domestic warmth that was a stark contrast to the metallic tang of the basement. Alara moved with an unhurried grace, pulling down two delicate porcelain mugs from an open cupboard and setting an old-fashioned kettle to boil on the stove. Silas, feeling suddenly, acutely self-conscious in his sweat-stained work clothes, stood awkwardly by the doorway, unsure where to put his large, calloused hands. "Please sit," she said, gesturing with an elegant hand to one of the chairs at the table. "Make yourself comfortable, Silas. You've earned it." He sat, resting his elbows on the smooth, cool wood, the texture a grounding sensation. He watched her as she prepared the tea, her movements precise and elegant, a quiet ritual. Her hands, he noticed again, were slender, with long, delicate fingers, yet they moved with a quiet, underlying strength, a capability. There was a subtle tremor in them, though, when she poured the hot water into the teapot, a fleeting hint of fragility that deepened the sense of something broken, something vulnerable, within her. "Earl Grey, all right?" she asked, not looking at him, her voice still soft, almost a murmur against the gentle hiss of the kettle. "Perfect," he replied, and to his surprise he felt a strange, unfamiliar sense of ease begin to settle over him, despite the unspoken tension that still hummed beneath the surface, a low, vibrant current. She placed a steaming mug of tea in front of him, the steam curling delicately upwards, along with a small, unassuming plate of golden-brown shortbread cookies. Their buttery, sweet scent wafted up to him, a comforting, familiar aroma that evoked childhood memories of his grandmother's kitchen. She then sat opposite him, her hands wrapped around her own mug, her gaze resting on him with an almost disconcerting directness, a quiet assessment that felt neither judgmental nor curious, but simply present. "So, Silas Vance," she began, her voice a little stronger now, yet still gentle, "tell me about yourself. What brings a young man like you to the world of plumbing? It seems a rather practical profession for someone with a thoughtful gaze." He chuckled, a short, self-deprecating sound that felt a little rough in the quiet room. "It's not exactly a passion, Alara. My uncle Arthur, he's been in the business for 40 years, practically since the pipes were first laid in this county. He said it was steady work, good money, and I needed something to get by, to find my footing. I'm actually trying to save up for art school." Her eyebrows arched slightly, a graceful, elegant movement that conveyed a quiet surprise. Art school? That's quite a departure from pipes and wrenches, isn't it? Yeah, I know, he said, feeling a familiar warmth spread through him as he spoke about his true aspirations, a part of himself he rarely shared with strangers, especially clients. I draw, mostly landscapes, some portraits, sometimes just abstract shapes. I want to tell stories with images. To capture a moment, a feeling, a whole world on a canvas. That's beautiful, Silas, she said, and her voice held a genuine admiration that was disarmingly sincere. To create something, to bring new worlds into being, even if only on paper, to give form to the unseen. She took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze drifting towards the window, where the last blush of twilight was fading into the deep, inky indigo of night. I used to paint years ago. Watercolors. Never very good. Not like I imagine your work is, but I enjoyed it. The process of mixing colors, the way the water carried the pigment, the quiet act of creation itself. There was a profound sadness in her tone, a wistful quality that spoke of a past irrevocably lost, of passions set aside, or perhaps forcefully abandoned. He wanted to ask, what happened? Why did you stop? What took that away from you? But the questions felt too intrusive, too personal, too raw for their still nascent, fragile connection. He felt a deep ache in his chest, a yearning to reach out, to offer comfort, but he held back, uncertain of the boundaries. They talked then, for what felt like both an eternity and a mere few minutes, the boundaries of time dissolving in the intimate quiet of the kitchen. They spoke of small, innocuous things at first, the peculiar humidity of a Vermont summer, the quiet, sometimes desolate beauty of rural life, the endless challenge of finding truly good coffee in a small town like Bramblewood. But slowly, imperceptibly, the conversation began to deepen, like a river finding its true course. He learned that she had lived in the house for over a decade, that she had come from far away, a place she didn't specify but alluded to with a faint wistfulness. He spoke of his own restless energy, his desire to explore, to create, to find his own distinct place in the vast, bewildering world, a world that often felt too large and overwhelming for his young shoulders. He noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor as the evening progressed, as the initial melancholy began to recede, replaced by a quiet animation, a subtle vivacity. Her eyes, those captivating moss-green pools, sparkled occasionally when she laughed, a low, melodic sound that resonated deep within him, a balm to his own quiet anxieties. She spoke of her secluded garden, of the rare, exotic orchids she tended with meticulous, almost obsessive care, and a flicker of deep passion ignited in her eyes, a fire that warmed the entire room. He found himself utterly captivated, drawn in by the quiet intensity of her presence, by the subtle nuances of her expressions, by the unspoken pain that still lingered around her like a faint, haunting perfume, a constant reminder of depths yet unexplored. At one point, he reached for another shortbread cookie, and his fingers brushed hers, which were resting on the table near the plate, slender and still. The contact was fleeting, accidental, a mere whisper of skin against skin, but an electric current seemed to pass between them, a jolt that went straight to his core. He pulled his hand back quickly, feeling a sudden, intense warmth spread through him, a blush creeping up his neck and across his cheeks. She didn't move her hand, but her gaze met his, and in that silent exchange, a silent acknowledgement of the tremor that had just passed between them, hung in the air, a palpable, almost vibrating presence. Her eyes, usually so composed, held a fleeting flicker of something akin to surprise, or perhaps a profound recognition, as if a long-held secret had just been subtly unveiled. I should really be going now, Ilara, Silas said, the words feeling utterly hollow, a self-defeating lie. The last thing he wanted was to leave. The comfortable silence, the shared space, the fragile connection that had blossomed in the dim, warm kitchen, felt incredibly precious, something to be guarded, to be savored. Alara didn't immediately respond. She simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering, profound. The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken current, a potent, almost overwhelming energy. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet stillness of the room. It was a moment of profound stasis, suspended precariously between the polite conventions of society and something far more complex, far more dangerous. He saw a struggle in her eyes, a battle between restraint and a desperate, aching longing, a desire to hold on to this unexpected connection. What happens now? No one expected. But it's what restores fairness. Then, slowly, deliberately, Alara reached out across the table. Her movement was graceful, unhurried, yet filled with an undeniable intention. It wasn't a direct reach for his hand, not yet. Instead, her fingers, those elegant, delicate fingers, grazed the smooth wooden surface near his mug, hovering inches away, a silent plea, an unspoken invitation. Her gaze, locked onto his, held a raw vulnerability that stole his breath, stripping away any last vestiges of his composure. The air crackled with an almost unbearable tension, a profound weight of unspoken words and deeply felt emotions. "Silas," she began, her voice a mere whisper, trembling slightly, yet imbued with an astonishing fragile strength. I know this is entirely inappropriate. I understand the complexities. It's late, and you have your life, your ambitious dreams of art school, and I am who I am with all the baggage that entails." She paused, taking a slow, shaky breath that seemed to vibrate through the quiet room. Her eyes, luminous in the dim light, reflected a deep, almost ancient sorrow, yet also a burgeoning, desperate hope. But tonight has been different, more than just a plumbing repair. Her gaze dropped to her hands, clasped tightly in her lap for a brief moment, then rose again, seeking his, imploring him. "I spend most of my days alone here, Silas. This house, as large as it is, can feel like a tomb. The silence can be deafening. And the memories, they cling to the walls, to the furniture. They weigh heavily on my heart." A visible tremor passed through her, a profound shiver that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "You came here to fix a pipe, a broken thing, a purely functional object. And in doing so, in your quiet competence, in your unexpected willingness to stay, you brought a quiet kind of light into this house, into my evening, into a part of me that I thought was long extinguished, perhaps even forgotten." Silas listened, mesmerized, a profound ache blooming in his chest, a strange mix of tenderness and fierce protectiveness. He understood. He recognized the profound, bone-deep loneliness she spoke of, a feeling he'd grappled with in his own way, though his experience was colored by the restless energy of youth and an unfulfilled ambition, hers by a deeper, more permanent sorrow, a past that seemed to cling to her like a shroud. The invisible barrier between them, constructed from age and circumstance, from societal expectations and unspoken rules, suddenly felt incredibly thin, almost transparent, ready to shatter with a single breath. "I was about to leave, Alara," he confessed, his voice raw with emotion, a confession torn from the deepest part of his being. "I had every intention of gathering my things and going. And then you asked me to stay, and I couldn't. I didn't want to go." The truth, stark and unadorned, hung between them, undeniable, a powerful current of shared vulnerability. It was a truth that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. A faint, almost imperceptible smile, fragile and beautiful, touched her lips, a delicate blossom in the quiet room. "No," she said, her voice now barely a breath, a mere wisp of sound, yet it carried an undeniable weight, a profound understanding. Her gaze, unwavering, locked onto his, mirroring the fierce intensity in his own eyes. "No, you didn't." And then, slowly, deliberately, she took another shaky, profound breath. Her hand, which had been hovering inches away, finally, decisively, reached across the table. It didn't grab, didn't demand. It simply settled, softly, gently, against the back of his own hand, a silent plea, an unspoken invitation that resonated through every fiber of his being. "You've made my night, Silas," she whispered, the words imbued with a depth of feeling that transcended simple gratitude. It was a heartfelt testament, a profound acknowledgement of solace found in an unexpected encounter, a beacon in the quiet darkness of her world. The simplicity of the phrase, coupled with the profound weight behind it, was a quiet culmination of all the unspoken tension, the shared vulnerability that had woven itself between them throughout the evening, binding them in an invisible thread. In that moment, everything shifted. The unspoken rules, the age difference, the professional dynamic of client and plumber, all of it dissolved into utter insignificance, replaced by the raw, undeniable human connection that pulsed between them, a palpable energy. It was a connection born of shared loneliness, of an unexpected understanding that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances, a fragile but powerful bloom in the arid landscape of their separate lives. Silas didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was tight with a tumult of emotions, tenderness so profound it was almost painful, a dizzying confusion, a sense of awe that settled deep in his bones. He simply looked at her, at the woman who had captivated him with her quiet grace, her profound sorrow, and her sudden, overwhelming vulnerability. And then, slowly, deliberately, as if in a dream, he turned his hand, his fingers brushing hers, a tentative, feather-light touch, and then, with a resolve he hadn't known he possessed, he gently, but firmly, took her hand in his. Her skin was warm, softer than he'd imagined, and he felt a profound jolt, a current of energy that pulsed through him, reaffirming the silent promise that had just passed between them. Her fingers, delicate yet surprisingly strong, curled around his, a soft, almost imperceptible squeeze, and a quiet sigh, barely audible, escaped her lips, a sound of relief and quiet acceptance. They sat there, hands clasped across the worn kitchen table, in the intimate, dim glow of the single overhead light. The silence that had once felt heavy with unsaid things now felt expansive, comforting, filled with the resonant hum of their shared moment. No more words were needed. The touch, the shared gaze, the quiet strength in her hand, the profound, almost aching vulnerability in her eyes. It spoke volumes, a language older than words. It spoke of a connection that defied logic, a solace found in the most unexpected of places, a bridge built, fragile yet strong, across the chasm of their separate lives. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if this was a fleeting moment, a desperate reach for connection in the quiet despair of her life, or the delicate, uncertain beginning of something more profound, something that would irrevocably alter the course of his young life.